Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into some pretty intriguing territory today. UAPs, what used to be called UFOs.
Yes. Always a fascinating topic.
It is, and there's been a lot of buzz lately, especially with this testimony from Michael Schellenberger.
Oh, yeah, the one he gave to the House Committee on Oversight and Accountability just last week, right?
Yeah.
November 13th, 2024.
That's the one. We'll be focusing on that today, unpacking some of his key arguments. It's a pretty dense document, so we'll try to break it down into, digestible pieces.
It's like a plan.
The big question we're going to try to tackle today is the government being straight with us about UAPs, or are there, potentially illegal programs going on that they're keeping hush-hush from Congress?
That's the core of it, isn't it? That's what Schellenberger seems to be suggesting, that Congress is being left in the dark about some pretty significant stuff, potentially.
Right. And that raises a whole bunch of other questions, like what exactly is Congress's responsibility when it comes to overseeing the military and, the intelligence agencies on something like this?
Yeah, it all goes back to the Constitution, doesn't it? Article 1, I believe.
Right, Article 1.
That's where it lays out Congress's duty to keep an eye on the executive branch, which of course includes both the military and the whole intelligence community, to make sure they're operating within the law and actually being accountable to the people they're supposed to be serving.
So, in theory, there shouldn't be anything that's completely off limits to Congress. But, we always hear about these super secret programs, the kind that are buried deep inside the intelligence world. Do those fall under congressional oversight, too?
Those would often fall under what are called controlled access programs, or CKEs for short.
KPs, got it.
And the National Security Act of 1947 actually added another layer of accountability here.
Okay, so what does that mean? What does the act say?
Well, basically, it says that any covert actions and any of these CKPs that are related to intelligence activities, especially by military intelligence, have to be reported to Congress.
Reported, so they can't just keep it all secret.
Exactly. And not only that, but the president has to provide a written justification, a finding explaining why this program is necessary. And that has to be given to both the House and Senate Intelligence Committees.
So Congress has the power and the legal framework is there to demand transparency. But, as we said, Schellenberger seems to think that when it comes to UAPs, that's not really what's happening.
He does. He points to a growing body of evidence, at least in his view, that suggests a serious lack of transparency and potentially even cover-ups going on.
Cover-ups, wow, that's a strong word. Can you give us an example of what Schellenberger considers evidence of a potential cover-up?
Well, he brings up this case, a historical one, where the U.S. Air Force used disinformation against, essentially a UFO enthusiast.
Okay, so they were trying to discredit him.
Yeah, and it was all to conceal a weapons program they were working on.
Mm.
And Schellenberger's concern is that similar tactics, spreading disinformation and whatnot, might be being used today regarding UAPs.
That's pretty concerning if true, especially with how much public interest there is in UAPs.
Absolutely. I mean, you've got agencies like ARO, the Airborne Object Identification and Management Synchronization Group.
That's a mouthful.
It is. But anyway, ARO claims that there's absolutely no reverse engineering of alien technology going on and that nothing is being hidden from Congress.
So they're saying everything is above board.
That's their official stance. But then you have Schellenberger arguing, quite forcefully, I might add, that the government isn't being completely honest. And he claims that ARO's dismissal of these cover-up claims as circular reporting, that it lacks any real evidence.
This whole circular reporting thing, can you explain that a little bit more? It sounds like he's saying they're not even taking the possibility of a cover-up seriously.
That's essentially what he's saying. He argues that ARO is dismissing these concerns not based on, any hard evidence, but rather on this belief that these claims, these cover-up claims, originate from, just baseless rumors or some kind of, belief system.
So they're just brushing it off.
Pretty much. And Schellenberger sees that as, a very inadequate response, to say the least.
And then we have the former director of ARO, who's gone on record publicly dismissing the entire UAP topic. It's a bit of a tangled web, isn't it?
It is. It's hard to know who to believe sometimes.
It really is. But a lot of Schellenberger's argument hinges on, witness testimony. How reliable are these accounts, really? We're talking about people claiming to have seen UAPs.
That's a very valid question. And Schellenberger, he emphasizes the training and experience of many of these witnesses.
Mm-hmm.
He's not just talking about, random people off the street. We're talking about people who are part of the U.S. intelligence community, the military, individuals who, because of their jobs, are trained to be observant, to be accurate in their reporting.
So people who know how to separate fact from fiction.
Precisely. They deal with sensitive information day in and day out.
Makes sense. So who are some of these witnesses?
Well, perhaps the most compelling testimony comes from John Ratcliffe.
Wait, Ratcliffe, the former director of national intelligence?
The one and only. And he stated very clearly that UAPs are demonstrating technologies that go beyond anything we have, beyond our current capabilities.
So he's saying they're more advanced than us.
That's exactly what he's saying. He even said that, we might not even be able to defend ourselves against some of these things.
That's a little unsettling, to say the least.
It is. And he specifically mentioned the Tic Tac encounter, the one where those Navy pilots saw that UAP off the coast a few years back.
Oh, right. The Tic Tac. That one was all over the news.
It was. And Ratcliffe said that U.S. intelligence analysts are completely confident that it wasn't any kind of foreign adversary technology.
So if it wasn't ours and it wasn't theirs, then what was it?
The million-dollar question. And to make things even more intriguing, Ratcliffe added that the public is only being told about a small fraction of the UAP sightings that have actually occurred.
Hold on. He's saying that there are more sightings than they're letting on.
That's exactly what he's saying.
Yeah.
Which, coming from a former director of national intelligence is quite a statement.
It is. But couldn't the government argue that they're keeping these sightings quiet to, protect national security or something?
That's a fair point. And Schellenberger actually addresses that in his testimony. He brings in John Greenwald Jr.
Who's that?
He's a researcher, specializes in Freedom of Information Act requests. FOIA requests.
FOIA. Okay, so he's trying to get information from the government.
Exactly. And Greenwald argues that the government consistently uses this excuse, this law enforcement investigation excuse, to avoid releasing anything about UAPs.
Even if the investigation is over?
Even then. So it's like they're using bureaucracy as a shield to keep things hidden.
Sounds a little suspicious, doesn't it?
It does raise questions.
Yeah.
But Schellenberger didn't just rely on researchers. He brought in people who had actually worked on these programs, from the inside.
Oh, wow. Like whistleblowers?
You could say that.
Yeah.
One of the most interesting testimonies came from Kirk McConnell. He worked as a congressional staffer for 37 years for both the Senate and House Select Committees on Intelligence.
Wow, so he was right in the thick of things.
He was. And he claims that he's heard firsthand accounts from people he trusts, alleging that there are these legacy UAP programs within the government, programs that might actually be illegal.
Illegal? Wow. What did the government have to say about that?
Well, they denied it, of course. A DOD spokesperson, Sue Gah, she said that there are absolutely no classified UAP programs that haven't been reported to Congress. And she said that if anything changes, if they find anything new, they'll share it with both Congress and the public. But, she added the caveat that they'll have to protect classified information, sources and methods, all that.
So they're saying they're being transparent, but, within limits.
Right, with the whole national security thing hanging over everything.
Yeah.
Which, of course, directly contradicts what Schellenberger is claiming. He says people within the DOD, the intelligence community, and their contractors are actively resisting transparency.
So who do we believe?
That's the challenge, isn't it? It's a classic he said, she said situation. But, okay, let's assume for a moment that Congress does want to get to the bottom of this.
Sure.
How do they actually go about overseeing these programs? Are there, legal mechanisms in place to make sure they're being kept in the loop? There are. And Schellenberger outlines a few of them in his testimony.
Like what? Give us an example.
Well, for instance, there are the annual reporting requirements for cyber operations.
Cyber operations? What does that have to do with UAPs?
Well, it's not directly related to UAPs, but it mandates that Congress gets regular updates on any cyber activities, and potential threats from foreign adversaries.
Okay, so it sets a precedent for regular reporting on sensitive issues.
Exactly. And then there's a system of presidential findings and notifications outlined in U.S. Code Title 50, Section 3093. This is specifically about covert actions, how they're authorized, and how they're reported to the intelligence committees.
So there's a framework in place.
There is. The question is whether it's being applied to UAP-related programs, and Schellenberger seems to think it's not.
He doesn't pull any punches, does he?
He doesn't. And there's also the Classified Information Procedures Act, CAPA, from 1980. That one mainly deals with criminal trials, but it does have an indirect impact on how classified information is handled across the government in general. It sets protocols for protecting classified data, even outside of a courtroom.
So how does that relate to UAPs?
Well, it influences how they handle that information, what they can and can't share. And then, of course, there's Executive Order 13526, which is all about classified national security information.
So all of these mechanisms, even if they're broader than just UAPs, they still apply to how that information is handled.
Precisely. Executive Order 13526 gets really specific. Like, it outlines who can classify information, what criteria they have to meet, and what types of information can be classified.
Like what?
Oh, things like military plans, intelligence activities, foreign relations, stuff like that. And it also says that this kind of information should only be shared with Congress if it's absolutely necessary for them to do their jobs, for legislative and oversight purposes.
So in theory, Congress should have access to what they need. But Schellenberger's argument is that when it comes to UAPs, they're not getting it. And he goes way back to support his case. Decades, right?
He does. He lays out this detailed historical timeline going all the way back to 1947, the year of the Roswell incident, up to the present day.
1947. Wow. Okay, so he's trying to show a pattern of government secrecy around UAPs.
Exactly. A pattern of cover-ups, conflicting stories, and withholding information from Congress and the public.
Okay, that timeline sounds fascinating. Let's dive into it and see what we can uncover.
Let's do it. Starting, perhaps, with Roswell itself. Roswell, yeah, I mean, it's iconic, right? One of the big ones in UFO history. But in Schellenberger's timeline, it's just the starting point. There's so much more. He brings up all these other incidents, projects, figures, like take Project Blue Book, for example.
Project Blue Book. Refresh my memory.
Ran from 52 to 69. It was a big Air Force investigation into UFOs, probably their longest running one. They were tasked with looking at thousands of reports, trying to figure out what was going on.
So the Air Force was taking it seriously, at least enough to, dedicate a whole project to it. But what did they actually find?
Officially, they concluded that most of the UFO sightings, they could be explained away. Misidentified aircraft, weather phenomena, hoaxes, that kind of thing.
So nothing to see here, move along.
Pretty much. But of course, there are plenty of people who disagree with that conclusion. Critics say that the Air Force was more interested in debunking sightings than actually investigating them. Really getting to the bottom of things.
And that kind of feeds into Schellenberger's whole argument, doesn't it? This idea that there's a pattern of dismissing evidence.
It does. And then there's the Robertson panel. That was in 53. CIA convened it. They were supposed to look at the national security threat posed by UFOs.
Okay, so the CIA was involved too.
Oh, yeah. And their conclusion, they basically said UFOs weren't a direct threat, but that all the public interest in them, that could be a problem.
A problem how?
Well, they were worried that foreign powers could use it, for propaganda or something.
So they were more worried about how people would react than about the UFOs themselves.
Seems that way. They even recommended that the government launch a public education campaign to debunk UFO sightings and try to get people to stop thinking about them so much.
Wow, so they were trying to make the whole UFO thing just go away.
That's one way to look at it.
Yeah.
And then you've got MJ-12, Majestic 12.
MJ-12, is that like the Men in Black stuff?
Kind of, yeah. It's this supposed secret committee that was formed way back in 47 to manage the recovery of crashed alien spacecraft.
So like a real-life X-Files situation.
Exactly. Now, most people think the documents about MJ-12 are fake, but the idea itself, it points to this deep distrust that people have in the government when it comes to UFOs.
I can see why. I mean, if even a fraction of what's in Schellenberger's timeline is true, it's hard not to be at least a little suspicious.
Right. And there's more. Project Grudge. That was another Air Force investigation, even before Project Blue Book, ran from 49 to 51. And they were specifically looking at whether UFO reports posed any kind of technological threat.
So they were worried about us falling behind technologically.
Yeah, it seems like that was a big concern back then. But like Blue Book, they concluded that most sightings could be explained conventionally.
But again, critics say they were biased towards debunking, right?
So we've got these official investigations, but they don't seem to be taken very seriously by a lot of people. What else is in this timeline that might support Schellenberger's argument?
Yeah, what else is there?
Well, it's not just the investigations themselves. Schellenberger brings up specific incidents, organizations, like, for example, the Battelle Memorial Institute. They were hired by the Air Force in the 50s to analyze UFO data.
Okay, so they brought in outside experts.
They did.
Yeah.
But even their analysis has been criticized for downplaying the data, just focusing on the conventional explanations again.
They're always trying to explain things away.
It's a pattern. And then, of course, you can't talk about government secrecy and UFOs without talking about Area 51.
Area 51, the holy grail of conspiracy theories, right?
Pretty much. The government says it's a real military base used for testing experimental aircraft and technology. And, they've always denied any connection to alien spacecraft. But that doesn't stop people from speculating, does it?
Of course not. It's
Here's
like the more you deny something, the more people think you're hiding something.
Exactly. And that brings us to ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, which we mentioned earlier. This was a program that ran inside the Pentagon from 2007 to 2012. And it was all about investigating UAPs.
So this was a dedicated UAP investigation within the Pentagon. It doesn't get much more official than that. So what came out of it? Did they find anything?
Their findings were never officially released to the public, but some of the people who worked on it, they've said that ATIP found evidence of UAPs that showed technology that's far beyond anything we understand.
Oh, really? So they found something, but they kept it quiet.
That's what they're saying. And there's a lot more in this timeline. All kinds of intriguing events, each one raising more questions about what the government knows and what they're not telling us.
Okay, give me some more of these intriguing events. I'm hooked.
Well, there's Project Moondust, for example. That was an Air Force program that was officially about recovering debris from foreign spacecraft.
Foreign spacecraft. Okay, so like stuff from Russia or China, right?
Right, officially.
Mm-hmm.
But some people think that it might have also been involved in recovering crashed alien spacecraft.
Oh, so like a secret UAP recovery program hiding in plain sight.
That's the theory. And then you have Bob Lazar. He claims to have worked at Area 51 back in the late 80s, reverse engineering alien spacecraft.
Bob Lazar, he's practically a legend in the UFO world.
He is. And while a lot of people have tried to debunk his story, it just won't go away. It speaks to that fascination people have with the idea of, recovered alien technology.
It's a great story, even if it might not be true.
Right. And Schellenberger's timeline goes on and on. Stories from people who claim they worked on secret programs, sightings near military bases, encounters with UAPs that can do things that seem impossible.
It's a lot to take in. I have to admit, it's a bit overwhelming. How do we even begin to make sense of it all?
It is a lot. But if we try to step back, look at the big picture, I think there are a few key takeaways from all of this.
Okay, let's try to synthesize this. What do you think are the most important patterns, the biggest implications of everything Schellenberger has laid out?
Well, one of the most striking things is this pattern of potential cover-ups and disinformation campaigns. Time and time again, you have people coming forward saying they've seen something or that they were involved in some secret program, and they're met with denials or attempts to discredit them.
And this goes back decades, right? It's not just a recent thing.
Exactly. From Roswell all the way to today. It seems like there's a constant effort to downplay anything to do with UAPs, to control the narrative.
Which, of course, only makes people more suspicious.
Of course. The more the government tries to keep things secret, the more people are going to think they're hiding something big.
Right. It's like they're shooting themselves in the foot. So what's the second big takeaway?
I think it's the potential threat that UAPs might pose, especially around, sensitive military installations. There have been lots of reports of UAPs being sighted near nuclear missile sites. Some people even say they've seen them interfering with nuclear weapon systems.
That's a little scary, to be honest.
It is. I mean, if these accounts are true, it raises some serious questions about our national security. Are we really as protected as we think we are?
It makes you wonder. So it's not just about, curiosity about UFOs. This could have real-world consequences. What about a third takeaway?
The third thing, I think, is the number of credible witnesses coming forward. It used to be that anyone who talked about seeing a UFO, they were dismissed as a kook. But now you have highly trained military personnel, intelligence officers, even scientists who are willing to go public with their experiences.
And these are people who have a lot to lose, right? If they speak out.
Exactly. Their careers, their reputations, some of them might even be worried about their safety. So the fact that they're willing to take that risk, it suggests that they really believe what they saw, that they think it's important for people to know the truth.
It definitely gives their stories more weight.
It does. And it makes us wonder, are we really being told everything? Does the government know more than they're letting on?
Big questions. So we've got this pattern of secrecy and disinformation. We've got potential threats to our security, and we've got credible people saying that something strange is going on. That paints a pretty compelling picture, doesn't it?
It does. And Schellenberger's argument is that all of this, it's not just in the past. He thinks the government is still withholding information. and that this lack of transparency, it's stopping us from understanding what UAPs really are.
So what can we do about it? If Congress is being kept in the dark, how do they, assert their authority? How do they get answers? That's the big question, isn't it? What can Congress actually do?
Well, Schellenberger has a few ideas. He really emphasizes congressional hearings and investigations, public hearings like the one the House Intelligence Committee held back in 2022.
Right, the one on counterterrorism and counterintelligence.
That's the one. He thinks those kinds of hearings, they can help raise public awareness and put pressure on the executive branch, to be more transparent.
To shine a light on it, force them to respond.
Exactly. He also recommends that Congress use its subpoena power, to compel people to testify. Bring in those key individuals from the military, the intelligence agencies, the ones who might actually know something.
No more hiding behind closed doors.
Right. Make them answer questions under oath.
Mm-hmm.
And he also suggests using budgetary authority. Congress controls the purse strings. They could say, okay, we'll give you funding for this program, but only if you give us more transparency on UAPs.
So hit them where it hurts their wallets.
Sort of, yeah. It's about using the tools they have to incentivize cooperation.
Make it in their best interest to be open. So basically, Schellenberger's advocating for Congress to be more proactive, right? More assertive.
He is. He says they can't just take the government's word for it anymore. They have to demand evidence, justification.
It's like shifting the burden of proof, right? Instead of Congress having to prove there's a cover-up, the government has to prove that they're being transparent.
Exactly. And it's not just about keeping the government in check. It's also about the public's right to know. Schellenberger believes that people deserve to know what the government knows about UAPs.
I mean, it makes sense. We're the ones paying for all this, right?
Our tax dollars are funding these programs.
So it boils down to transparency and accountability.
And the fundamental principles of a democracy. People need to be informed about things that could affect them, especially something as potentially significant as UAPs.
Right. I mean, this isn't just about some abstract scientific curiosity. It could have real implications for national security, maybe even for humanity as a whole.
Absolutely. It's something that needs to be discussed openly and honestly.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. We talked about Congress's oversight role, the possibility of cover-ups, the evidence that Schellenberger presented. It's a complicated issue with a lot of different perspectives.
It is. And while we might not have all the answers, Schellenberger's testimony has certainly given us a lot to think about.
It has. It makes you question what you think you know.
It does. And I think that's a good thing.
So what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from this conversation?
That this isn't over. This UAP issue, it's not going away. And the more we learn, the more questions come up.
It's a mystery that keeps unfolding.
It does. And as citizens, it's our responsibility to stay informed, to talk about these things, and to hold our leaders accountable for finding the truth.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of UAPs. It's a fascinating topic, and it's one that we'll definitely be revisiting as more information comes to light. Until next time, keep looking up, keep asking questions, and keep an open mind.